Alright, so let's continue on the tutorials with tunnels in mind. And this one here is a 3D rendering on Carrara that I'm going to explore a little bit more. What I want to do in particular is use what we just used in the prior series, in the prior part, to composite something on top of this. Right? So we will create our own tunnel, maybe a rotating tunnel, but we will want to see a portion of this one as a background, and this one in itself is also animated. Right, so you see here, for instance, if I view one and then just keep going, you can see it's animated, and in fact we dive into this tunnel kind of structure. It seems very long and far. You can see there's some refraction, some transparent parts to it. Great rendering. This was done in Carrara, and it's a great thing to use that type of output. You also see here another type of map. This one is actually the depth map. That's the distance. The brighter it is, the farther away it is, and so you can see when there are holes, gaps, where you can actually see the background. But this is not showing the background. This is showing how far the objects are that you're looking at. And so the black parts are very close, and you could use something like that also to control depth cueing or changing the color to add some fog, or for instance to use a blurring that varies by the amount. So the farther away it is, the brighter it is, the more you allow the blurring to occur. And so that's one of the many things you can do, not just on a single image, but over an entire image sequence, if you have saved it and then you want to composite that or use it as an animated swap. Now, when it's an animated swap you're using it for, you would want to typically have it as a DWA. Just save it to that, or save it as a AVI file, and then you can designate it, or you can store it. You can load it as an animation sequence and store it, and immediately with one click check that to make it the animated swap. This one here is yet another way to use it. This one actually identifies the object. So we have a couple of different objects, and they're given different gray values or numbers, and the black ones in the back are the ones that show the background, and then you have an increasing number of objects there. So there's many different ways to render stuff out in Carrara. This one here identifies the speed at which things are moving, so you can see how it's turning around as we go forward and then change, or backwards and then change to a forward movement. And so there's a lot of other really fascinating. This is of course the graphic visual that is perhaps the most interesting one, at least for general use, but there are a lot of other things that we can do to make this a really fascinating experience with the what shall we call it, with the tunnels that we're creating. So one thing I'm going to do is, first of all, make sure it's in the same dimensions. So you have, because that works the best, right, if it matches. There are always some surprises if it's not the same. So this one here I rendered out at fairly high quality with 512 by 512. That was done in Carrara. But you pick your favorite 3D programs and do what you want, and then I'm going to create another animation, and this time we'll make that also 512 by 512. So make sure we don't constrain it to the same aspect ratio we had initially. And there you go. Here's our image, and we will turn this into an animation at some point. Might as well do it right now. We can always change that later on, and we'll make that a 200 frame animation. Let's make sure we play it at 30 frames a second, and there we go. And right now there's nothing there, but let's use one of the filters for the dread plating. There was actually a suggestion by one of our users, why not instead of painting the patterns or the walls, the brick walls and so on, let's use the dread plating that we have. We have brick textures also. We could use those with some additional paper texture maybe to make it more interesting looking. But there is a dread plating, and that one has an interesting little side effect. Let me keep OK for that. You see it has sort of a drip down effect. It looks like some wet paint or grudge or I don't know, some water or something is rusting is coming down. So let me do that again here. Render the filter, render dread plating, and you get to control how much how big those plates are in the first place, and then also how much weathering you have. This is the weathering effect you see. Right, you can see this little wet paint effect. You can actually add to that wet paint some more. There is, under the artistic effects here, there's the wet paint filter. And you can make the bright parts drip down, or you can make the dark parts drip down. No, wait, that's the opacity. The bright parts this way, the dark parts that way. That's what it is. Right. So sometimes that's cool. I don't know if the tunnel will actually keep it usable, because when you think about it, this image is likely going to be wrapped on the inside of the tunnel, which is a cylinder. So maybe on the right side it looks like it's coming down, but it wraps to the other side here perhaps, and it might look it's dripping upwards. Let's try that. Let's just see if it's usable or if it looks odd. So let's go and store this image. In case it's good, we want to be able to keep using it. Let's give it a little bit of displacement or embossing, just to make it a bit more interesting looking here. There you go. It looks a bit more 3D-ish now. And in fact, let's use this one that we want to store. And let's now turn it into a tunnel. So let's go to the animated series there, or filters, and there's the tunnel. And let's say we don't rotate, so we really get to see, and we move very slowly, so we really get to see which way it's all going to pan out. And soon enough we have it. So it's a bit hard to say. It's not a very crisp display, but you can see over here it seems like it's dripping towards the bottom, I would say, and here too, not too bad. Maybe it's split. No, actually here it looks like it's taking it this way. Yeah, smearing it around there. Now that might be okay if it's turning, right? It might, like if it's turning one way, you might connect with it, so to speak. You might see that the wet paint is like lagging behind and it's smearing it because of the fact that it's turning. But without it, I don't know that I want to actually use it that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest we don't use it with the dread with the weathering. So let's do this again. Let's go render to dread plating and make them a little bit bigger and get rid of the weathering. Right, and make them even bigger than that. There you go. Let's do this, and we can change the brightness a little bit if we feel like there's too many bright ones or too many dark ones. Let's go to the filters for adjusting that. For instance, the curves might be useful, or the levels, or the value only contrast. Let's see the curves. With the curves you can saturate it on the bright end over here, where you can drag it down so there's only a few really bright spots. Or you could do something like flattening, giving it a plateau, and then doing the same thing on the bottom, so you have some really dark spots and some really bright spots. And then perhaps do a little bit of a staircasing here in between. So grab a couple of other spots that you want to sort of enforce, and that kind of limits the number of gray values to something a bit more manageable, just a few of them. I don't know what we'll do here. Maybe a little bit lighter. It's too dark here. So I mean, it's too bright. Let's make it darker the other way around, right? And what I really want to do in the end is cut some holes in a couple of places. So now let's see a couple of ways to indicate what parts should be transparent. Right. For one, we could pick anything that's bright. So we could do a selection like this here and say, show me anything that's lights. And so it will find the parts that are relatively light. You can highlight them with the selection overlay, the alpha overlay. And it's a bit difficult to see here, but anything that's pink or turned purple is not selected. So it did select just the bright parts, and that's that. And in fact, you can see the mask if you store it right here from the selection, store alpha. Right, that will show you what that selection mask actually looks like. And it's not all clean cut. It's not just like black or white. There are some gray values, and you might want to adjust that. You might want to say, no, you're either selected or you're not, but there's no halfway there. So the selected parts will be the holes, the windows that we cut open to see the other tunnels behind it, the background. And another technique to create perhaps some interesting looking windows might be to actually draw them right on here, or maybe to select them. So you could use the magic wand selection tool, perhaps with a little bit of tolerance there, right? And then click on one of those areas, and click on another one here, and click on another one here. And whatever you click on with a little bit of tolerance, so it picks more than just this one tile, you can see that this will open up some holes of rather interesting shapes potentially. And that one was too much. Let's do an undo for one. Let's do that. Okay, let's see what we get with this. Okay, so I'm going to leave these parts as holes, and one way to mark them as such is to keep the alpha channel, but we don't use the alpha channel, I think, in the making of the tunnel. So we can't really use the alpha channel here, that selection mask, as a way to indicate where to cut the holes, where to make it transparent. What we can do, as we saw in the earlier tutorials, we can give it a unique color, and let's get rid of the alpha overlay so we don't see that tint in pink color. What I'm going to do is just colorize it to something like green or blue, and then we can use that green screen or the blue screen compositing trick. So let's do that. Let's go and select some green color here with the left button, maybe a dark green, relatively well saturated green. And then what we want to do over this entire selection we have, just paint the green in. Now there's a couple of ways to do that. You could use the fill tool and maybe right click on that fill tool to see the fill settings, and you don't want to use a pattern, you don't want to use a gradient, you just want to have the entire color, same green color, plain color, just without any sort of dithering, but also without any sort of tolerance. So make sure the tolerance here now on that fill tool is relatively high, and then you can just fill here one by one. In fact, another way to fill them, if there's too many different little details and you don't want to miss any of them, one thing is perhaps to paint it. You use the brush that's very big, like the large brush here, and then you just paint right over it, and wherever it's selected it will open it up. And then the nice thing with this is that you can actually control a little bit better where perhaps not to actually make it transparent, where not to make it green. Right. Now once you've done that, perhaps you want to store that selection in case you want to get back to it. So again, store alpha right there, and so that way we have sort of a snapshot of that mask, of that selection. This one we don't need anymore. Let's go delete that and keep this one handy just in case. And then we have we can clear the alpha channel, we don't need it here. We have the green in there now, so let's store that as our working copy. And that's where we will cut open the holes. Now that obviously also means that we can really go in and do some interesting shapes instead. We could draw holes that are ovals or circles. We can cut holes that are like a bunch of vertical lines that are parallel to each other, right? So we could, for instance, use the fill tool. We're still filling with this color now, the opaque single green color, and we can draw something like a filled region right here. Right, and this can basically lead to interesting designs that will be parallel lines of some sort. We won't see them as green though, we'll make them transparent. So that is going to almost look like we're looking through some blinds, vertical blinds or horizontal blinds. Let's do a couple of those just to see where they're going to show and what it's going to look like. I don't know, there's a lot of other ways to, if you want a big hole, a big opening somewhere, you can do that. And then you can also do some soft transitions, soft openings that are not going to be just all or nothing. Like you can do a soft green, and you could do that with a variety of techniques. Let's keep that perhaps for another tutorial. So let's use this here as the stored image. Let's use this as the mask for our tutorial. I mean for our what shall we call it? For our tunnel. And where was it? Right here. So what I'll do is I'll make this the animation. In fact, let's go to the first image because I think it uses that. Let's click stored copy here, and go to animated tunnel. And this time we'll actually also allow it to rotate, but not so fast. Let's not move too fast. Reduce the shift X a little bit and also the shift Y, and okay that. So now we have this thing rotating. It's still happening, rendering right now. We have 222 frames, no, 200 frames exactly. And so now we see that it's moving like this, and you can see where those horizontal or vertical bars are that we had, like those blinds I described them as. And that will be an interesting opening, because some of the big openings will really allow us to enjoy the view to the background. So now we have the green elements there, and those are where we want to open the view to the background. We need now to have a background selected. And again, as we remember in the prior tutorial, we have a couple of ways to designate what the background is as an animation. We can either load it into and select it as an animator swap, or we can have it actually selected here from a swap image sequence. That's a dog waffle animation or an AVI file. But we also can composite directly what's in the images that we had rendered in Carrara, or we can load the animation. So first thing I'll do is I'll store this one here to disk so that we don't waste too much memory, and we can scrub through that, and here it is. And later we could click this to make this the swap, but of course this is not going to be the swap. This is the one in the foreground that we will use as the main animation. The swap is the background coming from the Carrara render image sequence. So let's go load that animation, load sequence, and as usual we'll go and navigate to our file system folders. Where is it? The D drive. And I have a daily dose. I think it's under the potpourri. Let's make sure we have it there somewhere. Oh, one more down. Potpourri, yep, there's a subfolder there. So here's the tunnels from Carrara, and these are all PNG files. We are looking for any file formats. We have the wildcard, but if we knew we had a bunch of targas, bitmaps, PNGs, and so on, we could identify which ones exactly we want. Like PNGs is what we know we have, but we also have image sequences from different parts. The multipass rendering in Carrara, we actually asked it to render the tunnel depth, the tunnel object ID, the object index, the velocity, as we saw. Remember what we saw, those different images, and then eventually the actual tunnel. So what we'll do is we'll select perhaps somewhere. It doesn't have to be the first one, but hey, why not? Let's select the first one here, and then perhaps a few more. In fact, let's select approximately too many, right? There's actually the number sequence here will tell you which one you're on, so we don't have to take a guess. If we want exactly 220, we know the first one is 0, so we can go to 219, and then we'll have a total of 220 exactly. So let's go to 219 there. Right, and load that selection, load selected. So that will replace the animation. And now this is what the animation looks like that we are loading. This was rendered in Carrara, and it is now an animation that we have ready to use. Now it's actually still loading. It's not completely done yet, but there it is. And you know what? This is not the part I wanted. I wanted to really fly into the tunnel. So these first 200 is probably something we should not use. Let's go back to animation and load image sequence, load sequence, and actually start from here, from about 220. And that means we will go to about 440. Let's go see if we have that many left. Ooh, just barely. 440. I don't know if that's one too many, but we can always delete one. So let's go do that. Yeah, that's what I wanted really to have as a background. And almost done. There it is. Yeah, we have a total of 221 frames now. So we need to delete one if we want that sequence to be identical to the numbers we have in this stored animation. Alright, so let's go. First of all, I don't need this anymore. I don't need this. Let's clear that up. And let's go store this animation after we delete, because this one here has 220 images. Here we'll make it 200, or maybe not even that many, and maybe it only has 200. You know what? Let's just delete one here, and we have now 220. Just in case that is the same as over here. And let's store that. And now put our thinking heads or thinking hats on and think what we want. So this one here should be the background. We shouldn't see it here anymore. This is the one we should see in the foreground. So let's load that one, click it, and store that. Restore that. So now we have it here, and that is indeed 200 images. So it's okay to have more though. For the animation here, we'll just use this as the background and use this animated swap image like so. Right, so now it is in the swap. We won't see it. Now you can cheat and like take a peek by combining the two, and that will show you the two together, but they are being multiplied together. So you could right click and say perhaps the layer mode should be, well, green screen. We have it right there. And there we go. So that's one way to see what's going to be visible through the openings of the green parts once we actually open that up with the compositing. So you could actually composite it right there. That's definitely a way to do it. The other way would be to use the filter menu, and the filter menu has the composite right there, and this one is with the swap. Again, green screen, bingo, it shows it. And now if we're all good with these parameters, maybe we adjust them, but then we click Ani and that will animate across the entire sequence, and you're done. Now there are a couple of other ways, and we've seen them, and it's good to see them again. So one other way, let me see if I restore this and I uncheck this box, so we don't actually have this as an animated swap. And in the animation, in the swap image, if I switch to it, we have this image but not as an animation. So I can clear it to just make it white, switch back, and now if you blend the two together, you really don't see any change and there's nothing else showing. So the only thing we have right now is this main animation in the foreground, but we know we do have an animation as an image sequence in files. And so that's what we can do the same traditional way, which is under the timeline right here. In the timeline, you can go and enable the file sequence from files right there. Composite with swap, nope. Composite with image with sequence, such as Targa, BMP, and the PNG right there too. Yep, that's the one. Now if it's a different color, you can select the color key sequence. If it's an alpha mask composition, you can do that. Cell edge, there's a couple of different techniques here. If you want to use the green screen, there you go. You select the green screen, and what you see is that the green screen is going to be turned transparent, and it's going to select the image. We haven't selected the image yet though, so we need to do that, and that's what you do here. Select image sequence, or select sequence. Now you're going to need to select the sequence, basically the first image from where you want to start. So let's say we go to daily dose, and where did we have it? On the potpourri right there. Tunnels. Okay, so here's the sequence. Now there's many images here. Some of them are showing the depth, some of them are showing the object ID, some of them are showing something else like the speed. None of those we want. What we want is this one, and we want to indicate the starting one. Maybe 220 or so was a good starting point. Alright, so with that 220, let's go and open that. And so now we have that sequence in the background. Alright, and we can adjust a little bit, how much of that we want to be transparent or fully opaque. Yeah, make sure we still see some of that beautiful background, and go and apply it. In fact, you could even keyframe that, so initially it's either fully transparent or opaque and it doesn't show anything. But see, here you could gradually transition it to a fully opaque mode. Let's not do that though, let's keep it like this. Alright, let's go apply that. And so now here is an example of compositing it with the image file sequence that came out of Carrara, still rendered though. And now if we didn't like that, we can undo that. So that's really beautiful, because that's where we can experiment with it a little bit and say, instead, let's first apply some embossing on the entire front animation sequence, with the green still in effect there. So we can go to let's see, sharpen, convolution. Those will have the embossing, the color emboss, and that will give it a little bit more 3D-ish 3D look or appearance. apply that. And then we can go back to the compositing with the image sequence. Color key, green screen. There you go. It still remembers the image sequence you used. We don't have to re-enter that. Apply that. And if we're still not happy with the shading on the tunnel, maybe we need to undo one more time, right? Because I mean, this looks interesting. It's getting there, but it's not quite there yet. So let's go and undo this most recent application. And perhaps this time what I'll do, instead of embossing it the way I just did earlier here, I'll use some of the filters we have here that also have the animation capability, including this one here, the artistic. No, not this one, the stylized, there it is, with the lighting tool. Alright, so the lighting tool is really interesting because it applies a light source that you can make a little bit brighter and bring a little bit closer to the surface. So you could, for instance, you want to make it look like there is a light source just around here in the lower left, or in the lower left corner there. But it's staying there. Maybe it's attached to you, or attached to the camera, so it's staying there in this location. But what you do see is you can adjust how much elevation or depth you give to that map, to that image, and also the details here. Let's give it really fine detail, and then multiply with the original color, or only have it what do we call it? Have it just sort of a displacement without the coloring showing. I like to still see a little bit of the original color. I like to also add some wet appearance, and that's often done by just adding a bit of specular gloss to it. So that will make it metallic looking, spreading some highlights, or wet. And then you can adjust some of these, even the color itself of the light source. So let's say we want that color to be different, very different from what the background is going to be, right? The background is kind of a bluish color. Let's make this one kind of a reddish tint, something like this, right? And then you could put a different color, a different light source even. Let's do it here, add light, and put another light. Oh wait, no, that's going to be animated over layers. We don't do that yet. Alright, so my bad. Let's go undo that, delete this layer. We'll have to be happy with just one level here. So let's go and minimize, or take it away. Let's go and undo. There you go, go back to that. So we still have that original display there. Okay, good. Now let's go to apply this lighting effect, the stylized, right there, artistic style lighting tool, and let's do that one more time. But just quickly, we have the reddish tint, something like this. We have a little bit more brightness. We have the light kind of in the lower left and closer to that surface. We have the extrusion, not too much, and maybe a little bit reduced on the detail smoothness there, and something like that. Now there's something wrong with oh, it's showing here this entire coloring as well. We obviously don't want that, so what I'm going to have to do is perhaps I can't access that right here. Alright, well, we'll change that. This here is just going to show it on this one frame. The other frames are all good. The green screen is still showing intact there. So maybe this first frame will be something we have to get rid of later on. But here we can certainly work with this. Okay, so something like that. Animate means that now it applies that across the entire sequence. The sequence is moving though, so you see that it's applying an interesting effect to that. Kind of a rusty looking or copper surface now. The green also though is getting a bit of texture or pattern there. And this first frame we need to delete, because that one's no good. But we want to make sure when we now composite that with the green here that we don't introduce that additional noise. So make sure you work with these sliders here to see to it that you don't get any sort of artificial paper texture showing through the gaps or through the window. And that's just a matter of increasing the tolerance. You see it around here, for instance. So let's see what that looks like. Maybe something like this. That's not right. Yeah, so that's going to be one place where we need to be careful when you apply the light source, that it's not introducing too much variance on the coloring and the shading of that. I mean, it can lead to interesting effects too, but not sure that I like this. So I'm going to undo that, and I have it here one more time, and this time I'm going to be a bit more careful with regard to what colors I'm using. In fact, right now I'm not going to apply any of that yet. Let's get out of this. So we have just this sequence here, and we can apply the colors with that. Let's do that one last time. Hopefully this is going to be better. Stylized lighting effects. And there's plenty of others, by the way, to experiment with. I just wanted to try to give this one a chance. Okay. And something like so, something like this. There you go. Well, that will be good. A little bit more brightness, a little bit more. Now we want to keep that green really good. Okay. There. I think that's it. Let's go and oh no, one more thing. The color of the light source. Let's try a purple-ish red now. Nah, that's way too much. Ambient light. That's just too intense. Let's give it something like this. I don't know. What do you think? Maybe we'll keep it like this. Ooh, that looks interesting. But the green is getting dark here. I don't like that. The green really needs to stay dominant everywhere. It should not become dark like that. So that's probably controlled by the amount of this multiply, and texture height does not affect that too much. Smoothness, that's pretty much the same thing. I don't know what to say. Help me out here. Maybe you know what, that the color is just too dark. Let's give it a little bit more brightness and put it in a little bit more close here. Well, some of it looks really interesting. All right, let's just try something like this. Animate that across the board. Yeah, that's good. This time at least we don't get that texture pattern appearing on the green background there. And so now we can go, first of all, store this, because you know how quickly we can mess this up. And go and apply that background again through our filter, no, timeline, right there. And with the image sequence, green sequence. Right, and here's that green again, and again we need to work with that tolerance a little bit to give it a chance to show you the copper solid parts, but also the opening in between. And yeah, I think that's a good one. Let's use that, apply that. But you see, it has a little bit of green on the edge because that was just too far for the light source to keep it at the bright level. But it's interesting too, still. Alright, so hopefully this will give you some more ideas on how to combine all these. And of course, in the far distance here, maybe we need to make it a little bit darker or brighter if there's a big bright light, the shiny light at the end of the tunnel. So you could, perhaps the last thing we'll want to do here is combine a black spot that isn't all sudden, but gradually gets there. So what we'll need to do, for instance, one technique for that is that we draw a selection that will be faded. There's actually a tool to do that right here under the gradients. Right click on that and you see the circular gradient tool. Now that's actually not drawing it into the selection mask, but we can use that later on. For instance, if we switch temporarily to the swap buffer or the swap image, turn this off, erase it, draw something like this. That's the default gradient, black to white. And then pick this up as a what do we call that, as a selection mask. right? So you could go, for instance, selection, store the current selection, which really doesn't exist, but then get the image, and bingo, you got that in the stored selection mask, and now you can replace it, so you now have a selection mask. And that selection mask here, it shows you the 50% mark where it goes from fully selected to non-selected. You actually want the opposite. You want it selected on the inside, so you can black it out, you can erase it or paint it to black. So let's do that by inverting the stored and replace it. So now the selection is actually on the inside. And what we'll do is we'll invert the image, or go back to the image. So we still have that selection mask here. If you look at the selection overlay, it clearly puts it into the pink tint over here. So the inside is where it's actually selected and still able to do some painting on it. And the painting we want to do on that is simply erase it to black. Now we want to do that over the entire image sequence, not just on this image. If it were on just this image, we could do a right click on that and clear the selected to black right there. And you see how it's only doing that on the inside here. And we can do that 2 times if it's not dark enough. There you go. So, but that's not what we want. We don't want that on just one image. So here's my trick. Let's go now to the selection here. I mean to the swap buffer again. Let's make sure we go to erase that. Let's go to first of all, don't show the overlay alpha. So now erase the entire image to black. We probably need to change the secondary color to black for that now, because if we erase it here, it's only erasing the selection to black, right? That's on the inside. We want the entire thing here black, and or not. I mean, this might work too. But let's go do that. Let's simply click the color here to select a black color. And now you can erase to black that entire image, clear selected to black, or even the frames, the entire, no, actually the frames you don't want to touch, just this image, which is going to end up in the swap image at the end. So clear selected to black, there you go, or clear the entire, just simple click here, and now jump back to the main image. So the swap image is now black, and it's in the swap image, right? That's the one that we don't see right now, but we have the selection mask enabled here, therefore we can rub it through, or we can erase to that, or we can do a composite, and that's exactly what we'll do here. We'll do a composite with swap across the entire image sequence there, or combine with swap even. If you mix the buffers, you can see from one to the other. You can see how right now we're showing this image in the front, and here we're showing the image that's in the swap. And you can do it that way, and it will respect and use the alpha channel to indicate the mask, to use the mask that controls where it's applying that transition to black or to the swap image, and then simply go here and animate that, meaning apply that across the entire sequence. So then that way this makes it a little bit more dark and perhaps mysterious and blurry, and you can do that 2 or 3 times if it needs it. You know, you can go combine with swap one more time and make it even darker and animate that. But of course, if there is a white light at the end of the tunnel, you might want to use a different color, or you might want to add some other shiny lights later on, like the glows or the nova or the lens flares. Those are great. Alright, so I think that's pretty much what I needed to cover in this tutorial. We now have a couple of interesting combinations that we have seen and learned how to combine different types of animations into a new one. And of course from here it's smooth sailing with exploring and having fun. So thanks for watching. We might have one last tutorial on this series, and that'll be perhaps to show what's at the end of the tunnel and to composite some additional special effects into it. So we'll let me think about that a little bit, and we'll get back to you in another tutorial. Thanks for watching.